going live. And as Chad is always prone to say, and rightly so, this book was written so to make believers out of people. That's the reason all these miracles of Jesus were written down. And of course, John said it, but it was at the direction, of course, of God. So, and I got all kinds of screens coming up there. Okay. You might ask those in the background if it looks to them like we're live. Can you tell, Steve?
Yes, it's live.
Okay. We're beginning our study in John chapter 18 and verse 1, the betrayal and arrest of Jesus. Of course, he's going to be arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. And having said that, Steve, why don't you start reading in John chapter 18?
When Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples over the brook Kidron, where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. And Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. Then Judas, having received a detachment of troops and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Jesus, therefore, knowing all things that would come upon him, went forward and said to them, Whom do you seek? They answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus said to them, I am he. And Judas, who betrayed him, also stood with them. Then when he said to them, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. Then he asked them again, Whom are you seeking? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus answered, I have told you that I am he. Therefore, if you seek me, let these others go their way, that the saying might be fulfilled which he spoke, of those whom you gave me, I have lost none. Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Then Jesus said to Peter, Put your sword into the sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me? Then the detachment of troops and the captain and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. And they led him away to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Now it was Caiaphas who gave counsel to the Jews that it was expedient that one man should die for the people.
So we see the arrest of the Lord, and we see Judas is mentioned once again, who betrayed him. I thought it was very interesting that they fell backwards to the ground when Jesus said, I am he, that I am he, and they drew back and fell to the ground. That's in verse 6. And we notice at this time now, Jesus made no attempt to get away, because now is the time. This is the time. Before, it was easy for him to get away. They weren't going to catch him until he was ready to be caught. But now he's ready to be caught. And when he asked him, well, whom are you seeking? And they said, we're seeking Jesus of Nazareth. And once again, Jesus says, I've told you that I'm he. Therefore, if you seek me, let these go their way. We see Jesus once again thinking of the disciples. He's going to be taken, tried, and crucified, but he's got in mind other people. He's always considerate of others. And we'll find other examples of that even in this very chapter. But
Rob, what is it you think made them draw back and fall to the ground?
But I just think that itself is a miraculous thing. I think it was just a burst of, for a lack of a better word, a burst of energy from God. When he said, I'm he, they fell over. You have a better explanation or a different explanation than that, Steve?
Well, no, I think you're exactly right. It is the power of God, and God is showing that in this statement, He's going to bring every man to his knees, and whether that individual is wanting to bow or whether he is not wanting to bow. And I mean, this is a tremendous demonstration of God's power and God's righteousness. Um, that's what I would say about it. Uh, Now, ask the same question to Chad.
Yeah.
Well, he could have, this same power could have been used every time he said the words "I am," you know.
Yes.
And there were obviously through this, especially in this book that we've been studying, his claims to be God, claims to be deity. There were plenty of times when he did say that. It does bring to my mind the time when Paul writes in I believe it's either Romans or Philippians I think it's Philippians, at the name of Jesus every knee shall bow. Um, and this is kind of him saying, I am, maybe just a glimpse into that. I've just never really thought a whole lot about that. So
Well, the I am statements always remind me, and I think they should, though I'm not certain of it. They always remind me of when Moses asked Jehovah, whom do I tell the Hebrew people? Who do I tell them? The slaves. Who do I tell them sent me? And God's answer was, I am. This is, to me, this is just a claim of deity. I am. I am He. And when He said that, that's when that burst of, for lack of a better term, a burst of energy, they fell back.
Well, and he was standing right next to the temple when he said, "Tear down this temple, and I'll rebuild it in 3 days." Obviously the people there are going to make the wrong conclusions. Who we're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. His answer is, "I am." The word "he" is italicized. It was added in. It wasn't in the original there. So I am He. I mean, yes, he is saying I am Jesus, but he's also, I think you're right. He's just saying I am.
I'm God. I'm
Yeah.
God. I'm one with the Father. Steve, I'm backing up a little bit, but I wanted to ask you this. This is, of course, the very first verse, but you've probably walked in the brook Kidron, and you've probably been in the Garden of Gethsemane, haven't you?
Yes, I don't recall ever crossing the brook Kidron, but I looked down into it. The Garden of Gethsemane is a couple of 100 feet higher than the Temple Mount, and of course, a couple of 100 feet lower than the wall of the temple is the brook Kidron. So it's very visible as you look down into that valley, but it's not very far. It's less than a half a mile, I would say. And here, the way this is described is that there's the brook Kidron, and then there's the Garden of Gethsemane. But they're probably about a half a mile from one another. And then, of course, the brook Kidron is right at the foot of the foundation of that wall of the temple. And so, yeah, it clearly is there.
Is that on the, if it was on and you'll know this, if it's on the east side of the temple, of the wall of Jerusalem, if it's on the east side, then it's going to be between Jerusalem and the Dead Sea. If it's on the west side, of course, it's on the opposite side. And I don't remember which that is. Do you remember that?
No, I really don't. But when I'm there next time, I'll look for it. But that's a very interesting point, because the Brook Kidron is where the lambs were killed, and the brook ran red with blood, and Jesus is just looking down into that valley where all of these lambs are going to be slaughtered, and it's just a very interesting scene there.
I guess I just kind of wanted those who are following along with us to realize how this is very close. This is very close to Jerusalem. It's not far outside the wall, and so and then you look on the other side of it, as you said, and you look up, and you see you see the Mount of Olives, and so maybe that all puts it in a little bit of a perspective, geographical perspective that might help a little bit.
Right.
We also noticed that Judas there was a detachment of troops, and of course that's Roman troops. And notice it also mentions officers from the chief priests. So there you're talking about those who served at the temple, and so they would be Jewish officers. So you have both Roman authorities, troops, and then you have the Jewish soldiers, guards, that would have been under the oversight of the high priest. Now, beyond that, he also mentioned about let them go. And I said, well, Jesus was always thinking about others from the beginning to the end. Even before he came to this earth, he was thinking about us in our lost and dying and hopeless condition. Let them go their way. And then he says in verse 9, that the saying might be fulfilled. This comes from the Psalms, which he spoke of, those whom you gave me, I have lost none. I find that kind of interesting, because I know for sure that the Calvinist is going to say, well, Judas never was one of them. He never was saved. And so I don't know. It's when you look at that wording, Jesus said, I haven't lost any, and yet we know that he lost Judas. I just find that to be kind of an interesting thought. And then the next verse, Chad, do you want to take verse 10 and make a comment? 10, 11, whatever, stop where you want to, but if you want to make a comment about that, that's kind of an interesting, very interesting verse.
Well, it is, I don't know how much of it is really Peter defending an earthly kingdom as it is defending someone that he cares about. But when he heals the man and puts the ear back, there is no evidence. It eliminates any evidence that Jesus would have advocated for anyone to rise up and fight physically in his name. So as far as why Peter took it upon himself to draw his sword and do that, I've heard some people say that, oh, well, Peter just missed. He was probably going for his head. He probably tried to kill him. I don't know. I don't know that. Maybe Peter was really good with a sword. I don't know. Good fisherman and a good with a sword. Either way, Jesus could have put his head back on just as easily as he did his ear. But maybe that's more along the lines of what motivated Jesus, or why Jesus did this, was to disarm any argument that, we can accuse you or charge you of insurrection or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Get the disciples all killed before they ever get started. But verse 11 might give us a little bit of a hint as to why Peter did that. Look at what Jesus said in verse 11. Jesus said to Peter, put your sword into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me? That makes me think, that wording makes me think that he was just protecting Jesus.
Yeah.
And there might be more to it. As you said, there might be a lot more to it than I know, but that much seems rather kind of obvious. There's something else that's kind of interesting about this. The word Malchus, you know what that means? What the word Malchus, the translation of that word?
No, go ahead.
It's king. Can you believe that? And maybe there's no significance to it, but his name, the servant's name was King. Well, here he is. Here he is, and they're going after, arresting, going to torture and crucify, which is a part of the torture, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and the high priest servant that's there on the spot. And he might have been among those authorities that came to arrest Jesus. But in any case, the servant's name was King. I probably at one time would have thought that was just happenstance, but the more I study the Bible, the longer I'm in the Old and New Testament together, I'm not sure there's too much that was just coincidence. I think we had a mastermind behind both testaments, and I think there's a whole lot in there that we will probably still get joy out of when we get to heaven and ask God, ask the Lord directly about all these things. But that is his name. Put your sword up, and Jesus' mission, if you think about it. And I think this is something that I read at one time, not today, but I think Adam Clark made this statement. He says, Jesus' mission was not to fight for his life, but to die for our lives. Put that sword up. His mission, he did not come to fight for his own life. Don't do that. Instead, he came to die for our lives. It's a good thought, whether or not that's, sometimes I think you can tell I quote and read from Adam Clark enough. It's kind of amazing some of the great wisdom and knowledge that man had. And also notice the wording, shall I not drink the cup? What's he talking about there, Chad, when he says the cup? Shall not
Going to the cross.
Yeah, the cross. He's talking about, it's as if you it's figurative language, like you pick the cup up instead of drinking your favorite beverage. When you drink it, you're drinking the suffering, the anguish, and the torture of the cross. Again, that's figurative language for what is happening. And now they take him before the high priest. And Steve, I forget how far down you read, but we need to read.
I read through 14.
Okay. Well, then verse 12, the detachment of troops and the captain and the officers of the Jews. So the captain of the troops, the Roman troops, and then the officers of the Jews. So you got both. You have both that are present, and so both Jew and Gentile are represented as arresting the Lord. They arrested him. And they bound him. Tied his hands behind him. And verse 13 says, and they led him to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Steve, why would they lead him to Annas? If Caiaphas is a high priest, why would they lead him to Annas before Caiaphas?
Well, I'm not sure, but Annas, this is a rotating position. And with the Passover beginning rather immediately, Annas would have conferred with Caiaphas and would have taken this particular position. I've heard several views on this, and I really don't know. But we're told here that it was Caiaphas who had given counsel to the Jews, and it was expedient that one man should die for the people and not the entire nation. And so that's as far as I'm willing to take it.
I think Annas was. I think that the Annas was high priest, but Rome put in office whoever they wanted to be in office, and Rome, of course, they booted Annas out, but then they end up putting in his son-in-law. And now Jewish sources outside the Bible say that Annas had such influence that even that was according to his liking, to his deal, that his son-in-law would be put in his place. In other words, he kept the power, a lot of the power, not all of it, but he kept a lot of the power he had before. And I understand that there was a great turnover of high priests there in just a few years, maybe 5 in 2 years or something. There was a great turnover. And as you said, verse 14 then tells us, you were looking back at other passages, but it was Caiaphas who advised the Jews that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. So it was Caiaphas who said, well, yeah, he needs to die because you innocent or not, really, he needs to die, because if he doesn't, Rome's going to come down on us. Any comments about that? Jesus being before the high priest, before we look at the denial that's mentioned in verse 15 on.
Go ahead.
Chad, do you want to read verse 15 at least down through verse 18?
Sure. Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did the other disciple, another disciple. Now that disciple was known to the high priest and went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest, but Peter stood at the door outside. Then the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to her who kept the door and brought Peter in. Then the servant girl who kept the door said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." And the servants and officers who had made a fire of coals stood there, for it was cold, and they warmed themselves. And Peter stood with them and warmed himself. Then the high priest then asked Jesus about his disciples and his doctrine.
This is, of course, this makes it makes me very sad every time I read this. Peter's, of course, betrayal. He's one of the inner circle, Peter, James, and John, very close and intimate. I think all the disciples were, but obviously those three maybe were even a little more connected with Jesus, at least as a man, than the others were. Peter stands at the door outside. He does not go in. We all remember already, we remember Jesus had told him that he would betray him, that he would deny him 3 times before the rooster ever crowed. And Peter says, "Are you one of his disciples?" He says, "I'm not." Steve, Chad, any comments about that? I mean, that should bring out feelings of how that would hurt, for instance.
Well, I think that's exactly what this response elicited in Jesus. Jesus is hurt to the depth of his soul, where, this one who just minutes or hours earlier had defended Jesus and had probably tried to cut the head off of Malchus. And now he's backing up. He's not defending Jesus any longer. This is just a very, very sad story, and that's as far as I will take it.
What do you think? Either one of you think about why do you think how could it happen that Peter would make such a drastic turnaround in such a short period of time? Chad, you got any thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, it starts going really south really fast. Maybe Peter is starting to realize what the cup means. It's obvious that, you know, I mean, I don't know. You would have thought that if he had said this, that I would have remembered, hey, he said I would do that. He said I would do that 3 times. I just did it once. I better not do it again.
Yeah.
So as far as what would motivate him to make such a drastic change like that, I would just imagine it's shame, embarrassment, disappointment, wishing that Jesus would kind of do what they were saying, save himself, take himself off the cross, do the literal things that everybody wanted him to do.
The thought that I've had about that is that Peter was still holding on to the idea that there was going to be an earthly kingdom and Jesus was going to be the king. And it is this event right here, which in a very emphatic manner is saying to Peter, whoa, a dead man can't serve on an earthly throne. And I just think that up until this point, Peter thought they were going to overcome the Romans and probably conquer the world. But now he knows that is not true. He's got to go back and do some thinking now and remember what Jesus said, and for the first time begin to understand the true nature of the kingdom.
Well, and that fact has hit him so hard that he's not keeping count, you know?
Yeah.
It could have been 5 or 6 times. He would have denied him, you know, because like you said, I mean, what kind of role did Peter think he was going to have? You know, maybe I'm going to be one of the top advisors to the king. So
well,
yeah, I'll be faithful to him. And well, now wait a minute. I don't want to be dead too. So
yeah, that I just think it's their misconception, and they weren't alone. Everybody else had, as far as I know, there might have been a few that understood the nature of the kingdom, but I don't think the disciples did, and Peter certainly didn't. By his reaction here, he's for the first time is seeing that Jesus isn't going to be here to set up an earthly kingdom. Now Jesus then, beginning in verse 19, is questioned by the high priest. And Steve, you want to read that down through verse 24?
All right. The high priest then asked Jesus about his disciples and his doctrine. Jesus answered him, I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in the temple where the Jews always meet. And in secret, I have said nothing. Why do you ask? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. Indeed, they know what I said. And when he had said these things, one of the officers who stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand, saying, Do you answer the high priest like that? Jesus answered him, If I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why do you strike me? Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest.
Jesus spoke openly. He did not do anything in secret. He was not in the desert like some of the false Christs, false messiahs of the time. Jesus was, everything he did was for everybody to hear and see. Now, he did veil what he taught many times in parables, that's for sure. But if you had the mind to hear, you could. And if you had the mind not to listen, it's just like today. Doesn't matter how great and convincing the argument, if you don't have the mind and heart to listen, you're not going to get him. And you can be the most brilliant person ever lived, and you're still not going to get it. You're not going to understand it. But Jesus taught, he says, well, ask my accusers. There hasn't been anything secretive about what I've done. They can tell you exactly what they think I've done wrong. They can tell you what I've said.
And while that is going on, you've got Simon Peter outside the door, warming himself, and he's, he's being interrogated by this servant girl, and Peter, he doesn't take this very well.
Jesus was grace. I mean, grace personified. Just think about how Jesus conducted himself in all of the abuse and ridicule and suffering to the point of death. And we see Peter once again being much like us. As soon as a little bit of pressure is applied, he cracks. I mean, that's all you can say. And notice, I know the punctuation is added, but I still think it's really probably quite precise. This is the New King James. Peter didn't. When he's told, "You're one of his disciples, aren't you?" and he denied it and said, "I am not." He's very emphatic. No, I'm not with this man. Oh, wow! That just hits me so hard to read that and think of that. No, I am not. Whoa.
He's already said I would die. He's already said I would die for him. Or Peter has already said, I, Peter, will die for you.
Yes.
All of these things that Jesus has done, all the miracles, all the signs. I mean, by now there's only one or two left that he's going to perform. And if you count saving the thief on the cross, there's only a couple of things left he's going to do miraculously, the resurrection and that. So when you're talking about John's theme, when he said these, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples that are not written in this book, but these are written that you may believe. Peter had these, and all of them, or close to all of them. And so he's throwing all that out the window and saying, nope, I don't know him.
I don't know him. That's
so that the magnitude of that statement and the denial of Peter is really, that would be something that would be, for me, hard to live with for the rest of my life. Even knowing what we know about Peter and how far he came and how he matured and how he did so well after the ascension. He was forgiven and he was an awesome apostle and preacher. But you still got that on your mind. It's rough.
The historical record, which, as you know, can be very misleading. But it seems to me like what I've read about Peter when he was taken to Rome for trial and when he was to be crucified, and he said he wasn't worthy to die the way his Lord had died, and that I don't know whether he asked to or they just did it, but they crucified Peter hanging upside down. I've always thought, or for many years, I've thought that's probably accurate. And maybe I just like to look at it that way, though I really do think it is. But that would testify to how much change there was in this man. He went from being a coward who denied the Lord to dying the same agonizing death that Jesus died, crucifixion. So that story, that it may be true. And then verse 26, one of the servants of the high priest, who was a relative of him whose ear Peter cut off, said, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" And she was there, she saw it. She's pretty persistent. Peter probably would like to have choked her. But she's persistent that, well, I saw you. I know what you did. And I think that's why it tells us that she was a relative of Malchus, the man who Peter cut his ear off. Peter denied it again, and immediately a rooster crowed. He denied it again, and the rooster crowed. Wow. Then at that point, that's when Peter, you almost think he would have hit bottom before this, but probably this is where he hit absolute bottom, because he remembers what Jesus had said. Any comments either one of you want to make before we look at the next verse or two there?
No, go ahead.
They led Jesus from Caiaphas, the high priest, to the praetorium, and it was early morning. But they did not go into the praetorium lest they should be defiled, that they might eat the Passover. Isn't this kind of sick, kind of a sadistic sickness? Here they are, they're willing to torture to death an innocent man. They go to any length to get their way, and yet they didn't want to be contaminated by going in to the praetorium, which would, of course, would have polluted them under the law of Moses to do so, and they wanted to be able to eat the Passover on the day instead of later.
Well, but I don't know, and they're not thinking this way, but so does the shedding of innocent blood,
Yes.
Which he's not innocent in their eyes, but yeah, it's very, like you said, sadistic and sick.
The praetorium, I remember reading that word regarding Rome, and the praetorium, it was not initially, it wasn't a place, it was a people. And that was the praetorium, that was the palace guard that Paul was preaching to whenever he was taken as a prisoner to Rome. So it was the praetorium was very elite Roman soldiers. They were paid better, and they had benefits that, and maybe we'd say like our Secret Service, or what are the men called? They're the closest to the president to guard him.
Yeah, that's them, Secret Service.
Okay, well, these were elite, and only a year or two after this time, Caesar disbanded them because they were the praetorium in Rome. He disbanded probably in other places too, but they were disbanded because of the fact that they had become too popular, and especially because they had just too much power. And so he was afraid of them. But the praetorium here is, and Steve can probably tell us this, wasn't it attached to the palace? I'm pretty sure it was.
Yes, it was attached to the Temple Mount, and it seems to have been built there as a protection for the temple. And so, this is tying in with Jesus, who is going to be high priest. He's going to be seated at the right hand of God, and he's gone to the praetorium. It's a very powerful message.
So
then
it became a building here And then,
Right.
like you said, the message that's given is a very, very powerful, stand out in power message.
Right. And then, Pilate, he doesn't have any scruples like these men do. And so he leaves the praetorium and he goes out to them. Whereas it was the other way around normally. And he asked them, well, tell me what accusation you bring against this man. And they said, well, if he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you. And they don't answer his question at all. But it's just very, very interesting. They did not want to go into the praetorium lest they might be defiled. So Pilate goes out to them. Very interesting.
Yeah, we want you to kill him. Well, what did he do? Well, he's just a bad man. He's just an evildoer. This is just so wrong on so many fronts. This trial was worse than a mockery. I mean, Jesus, of course, came to die for our sins, and he was treated cruelly by the very same world which is wicked that he came to save. In this case, the Jewish leaders and the Roman military who were taking orders from the Roman leaders. And notice in verse, if he weren't an evildoer, we wouldn't have given him to you, wouldn't have delivered him to you. And then in verse 31, Pilate said, well, you take him and judge him according to your law, the Jewish law, the law of Moses. You take him and judge him. Therefore, the Jews said to him, they said to Pilate, well, that's not lawful for us to put anyone to death. Now notice what was accomplished in that statement. Notice, and that's in verse 32. It's not lawful for us to put anyone to death. Now, why couldn't the Jews, if you look at the next verse, that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying by what death he would die? Why couldn't the Jews do it? According to God, why weren't the Jews allowed to do it? There might be more than one reason, but to me, it's kind of obvious that in this little point, at least, is obvious. In that they did not crucify. That was not a Jewish form of capital punishment. That was a Roman form. The Jews didn't. That's not how they killed people. And so the scripture, for the scripture to be filled, Jesus was going to be hung on a tree. He was going to be crucified. And
that's what verse 32 says, that so that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying by what death he would die. We can't put him to death because he's already said he's going to die by the cross. Well, they're not going to acknowledge that. They just want him dead.
That's right. They didn't care, but God did. The scriptures were going to be fulfilled. So, and then Pilate entered the praetorium, and he called for Jesus, and he said to him, "Are you king of the Jews?" It was a simple enough question. He calls for Jesus, and he says, "Are you the king? Are you the Jewish king?" And you know what he's got in mind? Or were you thinking about an uprising? Were you thinking about trying to overthrow Rome? But Jesus answered, said to him, "Now, are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me?" Now, is that something you understood? In other words, he's saying, is that something that you've heard yourself? Where did you come up with the idea that I was going to be involved in any kind of an uprising? Who told you this? Who led you to think I was a threat to Caesar? I think that's the only thing that makes sense. And Pilate answered, "Well, am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done?" There we are again. There we are again. I'm going to put you to death here in just a little while, and I'd kind of like to know what you did wrong.
Well, how many people do you think he's put to death in his career? I don't think there's a whole lot of secular history on Pilate. I know that there recently has been some found, but especially in the Roman Empire, to have an office of any kind of authority, you were corrupt, you were a murderer, you could have anybody killed you wanted to, that was under your jurisdiction. You didn't answer to anybody but Caesar. That was it. And if he's the one that placed you there, you were king where you were. So I kind of take it that that's where Pilate was. This is all rushing at him like a whirlwind. I mean, it's all coming at him 100 miles an hour. This big old riotous group of people, all they want to do is kill this guy. I got to get him killed and let me move on with my life.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It probably just seemed like a blip on the radar. Just another day at the office. But
I think as we read on down through here, though, that Jesus, the way he conducted himself and what he had to say, I think what at first would have been exactly like you say, another day at the office. I think it got to the point that it scared Pilate to death.
yeah,
He started thinking about this. He started putting things together for himself. Now notice Jesus actually answers the question, are you the king of the Jews? And of course, Jesus knows the implication. That's what my enemies have been, that's what these Jews have been saying, that I'm out to start an insurrection against Rome. Because look at his answer. Look what Jesus then says in verse 36. He says, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would fight, so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here. So he says, Pilate, no, I am no threat. I'm not here to have an army and march against Rome. That's not why I'm here. My kingdom is not of this world. My servants, they don't fight. And no doubt Pilate had heard about, maybe he had, I shouldn't say no doubt, about Peter, what he'd done, and the ear being put back on the Malchus, the servant of the high priest. But anyway, Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world. You know, we got a lot of people even yet today that are waiting for Jesus to set up an earthly kingdom. And yet Jesus himself declared, my kingdom is not, it is not of this world. That is not what it is. Jesus has a kingdom that is far above and superior to any earthly kingdom, even the great kingdom of David and Solomon, far, far, far superior. And then Pilate then said to him, he said, well, then are you a king? And Jesus answered and said, well, you say rightly that I am. And I understand that kind of language was he's just saying, yes, I am. What you're saying is true. Yes, I am. Are you a king? Yes, I am. Steve, why don't you read that verse 37 again? And if the two of you want to make a comment about it, we've got a couple minutes.
Okay. Pilate therefore said to him, are you a king then? Jesus answered, you say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. And Pilate says, what is truth? I mean, Pilate gets it. At this point, Pilate knows that Jesus is not a threat to him. He's not a threat to the Jews. He is only a threat to religious authority, civil authority, spiritual authority, and he is not a threat to Rome or the Jews or the world. He is about changing the world. And Pilate has begun to get it here. And he goes out from here and says, well, I find no fault in him at all. it's a beautiful sentiment, but it's also true that Jesus had no faults.
Chad?
Well, and then the chapter wraps up with really what Andrew was talking about Sunday in the Lord's Supper lesson about Barabbas being the one released and the impact that would have had. That Jesus is able to do this. Pilate's looking for a way out, hoping that they're gonna ask for Jesus, and they don't.
Notice how once again, and throughout this book, Jesus refers to the truth. He said, just over and over again, he refers to truth. And, Pilate is curious about that, but, what is truth? Jesus said, that I should bear witness to the truth there in verse 37. And everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. I can't help but think of those sheep that Jesus is calling his sheep. And we're the sheep and he's the shepherd. Everyone who is of the truth, they hear my voice. They hear.
In chapter 17 in his prayer, he said, sanctify them in truth. Your word is true. Your word is true.
And so, and yet, I don't really, not very often, I wouldn't say never, because it happens. I don't like to look at the present political climate and make comparisons in the scripture as a rule, though I do some, at least to myself. But look, Pilate is a career politician, and truth, he doesn't really care much. It doesn't really matter. He's in there to stay in office. That's what he's there for. It's being in office. It's the power and maybe mostly the wealth that comes from being in office. And yet here is a man, a very simple man, who says he's not a king, and he wants to offer truth. What is truth? I really don't. I mean, I can see Pilate understanding some things here. What he did understand was that Jesus was innocent. He knew that. It tells us so. But his office, his position in office, was more important to him than anything that had to do with truth. And of course, we're looking at the truth of God's word. That's what we're considering here. And then he offers to release Barabbas, and we know from other passages that Barabbas was not only a thief, but he was a murderer. Not only a robber, but a murderer, and yet they didn't care. We want release Barabbas. They wanted Christ dead. We see in Matthew that not just the leaders, the religious leaders, but the people, they shouted, let his blood be upon us and upon our children. Because see, even though it's a little easy at times to focus on what the Romans did or what the Jewish leaders did, but the fact is that Jesus came for a lost and dying world. There was none righteous, no, not one. Everybody needed him, and everybody still needs him today. And that is maybe the greatest truth of all. You guys want to make a final comment, and we'll close out this session.
I'm good. I appreciate it, Rob. It was a very good study.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys, and I will talk to you later.